What if you never had to fear a blood test again? No needles, no tubes, no watching someone else tie a rubber band around your arm while you sit in a sterile room thinking about anything. Just a tiny drop of blood from your fingertip is asked, and 200 answers. Cancer, diabetes, HIV, cholesterol, hormones, all of it, in minutes. That was the promise. And for a moment, a long, expensive, dangerous moment, the whole world believed it. So what was the problem? The machine wasn't working, the results were wrong, patients were receiving false diagnoses, and the woman behind it all had raised $700 million from the smartest investors on the planet, not despite the lies, because of the lies. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, and what happens when the world wants to believe something so much, when it stops questioning whether it's actually true. That's the biggest mystery. Let's start where every great American scam begins, with a dream and with a school dropout. The year is 2003. Elizabeth Holmes is 19 years old. She's just graduated from Stanford after a year of studying chemical engineering. A smart and ambitious young woman. She's already convinced she'll change the world, not eventually, now. She'd grown up worshiping Thomas Edison, the lone genius who wills something into existence through sheer force of vision. She wanted that story, not the slow grind of clinical trials and peer review, the moment, the magazine cover. She called her company Theranos, Therapy Plus Diagnosis, and her pitch was irresistible. Imagine catching cancer early, not because you booked the right appointment, but because a routine finger prick at your local pharmacy told you something was wrong before you felt a single symptom. One drop of blood, 200 answers. No needles, no waiting, no fear. This wasn't just a product. It was a moral argument. Healthcare is broken. People suffer because of it. I'm going to fix it. Silicon Valley heard that pitch and opened its wallet. Money arrived fast. Venture capitalists wrote checks, then larger checks. And Holmes didn't just attract money, she attracted credibility. Her board read like a shadow government. George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, General James Mattis, men whose names alone functioned as a seal of approval. None of them understood the science. That was, it would later become clear, entirely the point. When anyone asked how the technology worked, Holmes had a practiced answer. Confident, vague, complicated enough to make the questioner feel they weren't sophisticated enough to understand. It's proprietary. It's revolutionary. Trust me. And they did. Because she had the right voice, the right posture, the right wardrobe, the Steve Jobs black turtleneck worn so deliberately it almost functioned as a costume. She'd dropped out of Stanford. She had a vision. She spoke in the cadence of people who change things. In Silicon Valley, that was enough. By 2013, Forbes had named her the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. Time put her on its cover. She gave TED Talks. Theranos was valued at $9 billion, and inside its headquarters, the glass walls, the biometric scanners, the whole sleek theater of disruption, sat the machine that was supposed to make all of it real. They called it the Edison. The Edison was supposed to be the miracle. 200 blood tests from a single drop, fast, accurate, cheap. What it actually was broken, not almost working, not a promising prototype, broken. On a good day, the Edison could run a dozen tests, sometimes fewer, and even then, the results were so unreliable that the engineers had a dark joke. The most predictable thing about the machine was how unpredictably it would fail. But by the time anyone understood the full scale of the problem, the story was too large to stop. Walgreens had signed a deal, Safeway had committed $350 million, and Holmes had told the world, on stages, in magazines, in congressional testimony, that the technology worked. So Theranos did what desperate companies do. They faked it. When investors came for demonstrations, the Edison was polished like a stage prop. Staff rehearsed their movements, and the results investors watched being generated, those results didn't come from the Edison at all. They came from conventional lab equipment hidden in a back room, running tests the old-fashioned way. Real blood, fake demo. The investors left believing they'd witnessed the future of medicine, What they'd actually witnessed was a very expensive magic trick. Behind the glass walls, the engineers were quietly unraveling. Concerns got routed into silence. Departments were sealed off from each other by design. Engineers couldn't talk to lab staff couldn't talk to sales. No single person except Holmes had the complete picture, and standing just behind her was Sonny Balwani, Theranos' COO, Holmes's secret romantic partner. A man with no background in medicine and an absolute talent for fear. He screamed in meetings. He threatened employees with legal action. His standard response to anyone who raised a concern: if you don't believe in this mission, leave. A lot of people did. But the ones who stayed, the ones who kept running the tests and sending results to real patients making real medical decisions, they lived with something the investors never saw. They lived with the knowledge of what was actually happening in those labs. Because the patients were real. This is the part of the story that gets buried under investor losses and legal proceedings and magazine retrospectives. The patients were real. A woman received a result telling her she was HIV positive, then a second confirming it. She spent weeks restructuring her understanding of her own life, her relationships, her future, before a different lab told her the results had been wrong. A man received cancer markers that sent him into months of fear and medical consultations and the specific agony of waiting. The markers were false, hormone readings that were inaccurate, pregnancy results that were wrong, cholesterol levels that sent people to cardiologists who didn't need to go, or worse, failed to send people who did. Inside Theranos, these were called anomalies. That word is doing enormous work in that sentence. Clinical, detached, designed to create distance between a company and its consequences. Outside Theranos, the anomalies had names, they had families. They had the specific, irreplaceable experience of having their lives redirected by a piece of paper that told them something that wasn't true. And one loss hits heavier than all the rest. A pathologist named Ian Gibbons, trained, experienced, someone who understood exactly what was happening in Theranos' labs, tried to raise the alarm. He documented his concerns. He escalated through proper channels. He was told he wasn't a team player, that he didn't understand the bigger picture. He was pushed out. Weeks later, he died by suicide. In almost every account of the Theranos story, Ian Gibbons appears for one sentence and disappears, consumed by the faster narrative of investor losses and courtroom drama. But Ian Gibbons was a person. He saw something dangerous, he tried to stop it, and the system built to protect its own fiction swallowed him. That is not an anomaly. That is a cost. The truth about Theranos didn't arrive as a sudden revelation. It arrived slowly, through the persistence of people who refused to stop asking questions. Two names broke everything open. Erica Chung joined as a young lab associate. She noticed quickly that results were wildly inconsistent, the kind of variance that in any legitimate lab would trigger an immediate review. She raised concerns. Her badge access was revoked. She left. She kept the documentation. Tyler Schultz was 22 and the grandson of George Schultz, the former Secretary of State on Theranos' board. Tyler had joined believing. He left after watching fake demonstrations, manipulated data, and a culture where asking a scientific question felt like an act of rebellion. He tried to tell his grandfather, Theranos is lying about everything. His grandfather did not want to hear it. Elizabeth is a visionary. Innovation takes time. You don't understand the bigger picture. When Tyler took his concerns outside the company, Theranos responded with its full legal force, surveillance, private investigators, lawsuits designed to financially destroy him before his 25th birthday. He held. So did Erica. And eventually their testimony reached a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou. What Carreyrou did, in an era when Theranos was aggressively litigious, when sources feared retaliation, when Holmes had relationships with media owners powerful enough to kill stories, was simply keep going. He met sources in parking garages. He verified documents for months. He built a case with the patience of someone who understood the story was too important to get wrong. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published the investigation. It stated plainly Theranos was not using its own technology for most of its tests. The Edison couldn't deliver. Results had been dangerously inaccurate. Patients had been harmed. Holmes went on CNBC. She called the reporting false. She used the language of the visionary under siege. This is what happens when you try to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, then you change the world. It was a brilliant performance. It was also the last one. Walgreens froze the partnership. Safeway pulled out entirely. Patients came forward. And in 2016, federal regulators inspected Theranos' labs and found what the engineers had known for years. Quality controls non-existent. Results unreliable across nearly every test category. Basic laboratory standards not met. Theranos was banned from operating blood testing labs. Holmes barred from running a lab for 2 years. The company ordered to void 2 years of blood test results. 2 years. Think about what that means. 2 years of medical decisions, diagnoses pursued, treatment started, consultation sought, all made on data a federal agency had officially declared invalid. Not anomalies, invalid. Criminal charges followed, wire fraud, conspiracy, up to 20 years per count. The trial finally began in late 2021. Former employees testified about being silenced. Investors described pitch meetings bearing no relationship to reality. Lab technicians explained in devastating detail exactly how results had been manipulated. Holmes took the stand for 7 days. She said she'd believed in the mission, never intended to mislead. She also accused Balwani of emotional and psychological abuse. In January 2022, guilty. 4 counts of defrauding investors, acquitted on charges related to patient harm, a verdict the patients received in silence. Balwani found guilty on all 12 counts. Holmes sentenced to 11 years, Balwani to nearly 13. Theranos dissolved. Labs shut down. The Edison dismantled and thrown away. Now, here is what this story is actually about. It would be easy to end here. Holmes was a fraud. She got caught. Justice was done. That ending is too comfortable. Theranos didn't survive because Holmes was uniquely deceptive. It survived because the people around her had powerful reasons to want to believe. George Shultz had staked his name. Walgreens had signed the contract. Investors had written the checks. Everyone had a version of the story they needed to be true. And so they looked away from the evidence. Not because they were stupid, but because belief, once it becomes identity, becomes almost impossible to question. This structure exists right now, in 2025, in different industries with different language. The founder with the grand vision and the vague explanation. The board assembled for credibility rather than expertise. The culture that mistakes secrecy for innovation. The investors who write the check before asking how the machine actually works. The machine that doesn't work. You will encounter this again, in a company you're reading about, in an investment you're considering, in something asking you to trust it before giving you any real reason to. When that happens, remember Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz? What it cost them to simply say the numbers don't add up. And remember Ian Gibbons, who said the same thing and didn't survive to see the verdict. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, not charisma, not a turtleneck, not a board of former secretaries of state. Evidence. That's what we do here. We follow the money, the documents, the people the headlines forgot. If that's the kind of story you want to keep watching, you already know what to do. The next one is already waiting, and it won't be what you expect. Stay close.